Okay, we're back. We're live. Monday morning. Make that Tuesday morning, the beginning of our broadcast week, right after Memorial Day, with Mike DeWeert, our chief scientist here on ThinkTech. And we're calling this Community Matters, and we're asking, where are we on masks? Because, I think a lot of people are confused or uninformed. Mike, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Jay. It's good to be here.
Well,
good to be in the state where most people are vaccinated.
Yeah, and that's comforting, but it also leads to complacency. And the numbers are going down on the mainland too, at least in some places. And so we're living in a time where complacency is the rule of the day, I think. And I think the CDC has actually made us more complacent. My first question is, what do you think about Rochelle Walensky's remarkable announcement 2 weeks ago that if you were vaccinated, you didn't have to wear a mask?
Yeah, I think that ignores a lot of social science. I mean, I believe that the hypothesis was that if you gave people the incentive of being able to take off their masks if they were vaccinated, then they'd be more likely to get vaccinated. But that relies on people being on the honor system and actually being honest. You're requiring somebody who isn't vaccinated to declare, hey, I'm going to wear my mask because I'm not vaccinated. And people are reluctant to stigmatize themselves that way. So it just ignores the social science, which is really unfortunate. They probably should have consulted an economist or two before they made that decision.
Well, this leads us to the tragedy of the commons. And if I had my druthers, I would have renamed this show The Tragedy of the Commons. Can you talk about the tragedy of the commons?
Yeah, it's a phenomenon that's probably as old as human nature, but it's first documented by William Forster Lloyd, a British economist, in 1833. He noted that when there's a common resource like a pasture or a water source that a lot of people use, but without constraint, there's a tendency for a few bad actors to overgraze, overuse, deplete the resource to their own benefit, but to the detriment of the wider common and to the detriment of the long-term good of the whole community, including themselves. We see it everywhere. In the case of the COVID, the common good that's being depleted is our ability to walk around and interact with each other without fear of contracting a deadly contagion. If people simply refuse to get vaccinated and refuse to wear the mask, that's not their personal decision only. It affects the whole community, because you can be contagious before you show symptoms. You can be asymptomatic and contagious, and then you could kill someone else, by your own selfish use of the common good. In this case, the air we all have to breathe.
You're not suggesting there are people around who would not wear a mask and then lie about whether they had the vaccine. You're not suggesting that, are you?
Why would I suggest it? I'm going to say it. State it boldly and flat out. There are people who will lie.
What makes them lie?
Yeah.
What makes them lie like to cut the corner? I mean, have a tragedy of the commons benefit?
Well, it's like they don't want to stigmatize themselves. They don't want to reveal their lack of vaccine or lack of common sense in being vaccine resistant. That's possible. It's also possible that, for example, I went to the Marine Corps commissary with a friend of mine who has access, and the sign at the door says, you don't have to wear a mask if you've been vaccinated. It's like, there's nobody checking, nobody looking at your vaccine card. So it's like, you just walk in. I mean, you don't even have to say that you're vaccinated to get in. You just go in without your mask on. They're going to assume that you're obeying the rules. And this is, of course, a federal facility, so it follows federal rules. And it's really unfortunate. I was very pleased when EGA kept the mask requirement on, after the CDC made their announcement, because if everybody has to wear their masks, then nobody has to stigmatize themselves. Nobody has to declare their vaccine status. And that plays better with human nature than,
What do you mean vaccination card? What vaccination card? We don't have a national passport. We don't even have a state passport.
True.
Usually the interaction is something like, have you been vaccinated? Answer yes. That's it.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a
Yeah.
hesitation there, and when that happens, I
Mhm.
say to the person, "Oh, you have a reluctance. You have your
Mhm. Mhm.
reluctancy," and then they say, "Yeah, I'm reluctant." But that's the conversation. That's it.
Mhm.
Bottom line is, there's no way they can really prove in most places, or they really have to prove. They usually say, I've been vaccinated, period.
Yeah. 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 Of course, I got a little card with a sticker on it that says when I was vaccinated, what I was vaccinated with, where I was vaccinated. So I have that card, and I got a copy of it on my iPhone, so I can at least show that. And if I wanted to, I could get the card laminated and carry it in my wallet. Although I really, it's too precious to actually risk having out in the open, showing to people. But
You don't
you can
always get
prove it.
that card, though. There are many
Mm.
places and circumstances where there is no such card, and there is no
Mhm. Mhm.
uniform way. And
Yeah.
if I am some official,
Mhm.
and if I am burdened, tasked with finding out if people have been vaccinated, I have no reliable way to do that.
Yeah, true. We could use better databases. We need better databases. Maybe Ohio's pointing the way. Ohio has this lottery now, that if you have been vaccinated anywhere, even if you're an Ohio citizen that's been vaccinated in Florida or whatever, if you can prove you've been vaccinated, you can enter the lottery and be eligible for $1 million prize. That has been very successful at motivating more people to get vaccinated. And the fact that if you were vaccinated last year, you still can enter the lottery, makes it very fair. So Ohio must have some way to verify when people show their proof that they have proof. Um, so that's,
Talk about social science. So
yeah.
why did you get vaccinated, Mike? Was it because you wanted to save your life and the life of your family? Was it because you didn't want to spread virus among your friends and associates, or maybe something else? Oh yeah, I wanted to win the $1 million in the lottery. That's why I got vaccinated. You got it?
you know, Whatever gets people to do the right thing.
Well, in some places
I
they want
mean,
to pay
yeah,
them
yeah,
$100,
yeah,
and some all
yeah,
kinds of ridiculous
yeah, yeah,
incentives,
yeah.
when in fact they're saving their own lives.
Yeah, yeah. If you were vaccinated before the incentives came along, you won the common sense lottery. If you were vaccinated and avoided the COVID, you've already won the lottery in a sense. But this giving incentives, it's not just people say we don't want to give incentives. It's unfair to those already been vaccinated. But it's like this is a community thing. Even if you've been vaccinated, there's a 6% chance you might still contract the disease, although there's like a less than 1% chance you get seriously sick from it. But a 1% chance is still, 1 out of every 100 people been vaccinated could have a serious illness. So you still want the community to be protected by as many people getting vaccinated as possible. And if it takes $50 gift card like California is doing, okay, let's get because it costs way more to treat a COVID patient who is
Sure,
seriously ill than $50.
sure.
And then the fear of for people who would normally go out and spend their money and go to the movies and stuff, there are people actually would be afraid to keep going out, and that costs the economy. It costs all of us in the long run. So I don't have a problem with incentives. I wish Hawaii would allow lotteries, because the lottery seems to be a very effective, incentive, judging by the experience of Ohio, and now California is doing it too. And California is like offering $1.5 million prizes, and they're really trying to get people motivated to get the vaccine. I don't know what we can do in Hawaii to motivate good behavior. Um, and having said it shouldn't take a prize. Um, the tragedy of the commons isn't inevitable. People who can band together for the common good, and they've done it. An economist, oh, what was her name? Eleanor Ostrom. She won the Nobel Prize in 2009 for documenting cases in which there was a common uh, resource that was effectively managed without laws and without privatization by people who just recognized that the common good demanded that they get together and share this thing properly. She won the Nobel Prize for that. It's still not clear how to make those lessons from those communities she documented work in the broader regime. Apparently, it's very dependent on local people behaving in locally appropriate ways to protect the local resources. And so one big blanket national policy might not work so well. So we've got to find a way in Hawaii to motivate the good behavior, because we need to get to 70 or 80% vaccination to really have herd immunity and safely reopen for tourism. I mean, I'm just afraid it's going to. Yeah.
I'm thinking of it's a culture point. If I go to Japan, not to say that Japan is a real success story right now, they're still having an emergency and they're shut down. But traditionally in Japan, if you have a cold, you wear a mask. That doesn't help you much because you already have the cold, but it helps all the people around you from catching the cold. And this has been going on a long time. This is just hundreds of years at least. You say to yourself, what a good thing. It doesn't happen all that often in the US where you see a person wearing a mask for a cold in order to protect the people he or she deals with. And I find it interesting in a number of levels. One is, Hawaii is largely, culturally Japanese, and yet, well, I think we do have a certain amount of concern for the commons here. I think we inherited some of that from Japan. But the other thing, and maybe you have an idea about it, is it doesn't work in Japan. They've had a surge. What happened in Japan, masks and all, where they wound up having a surge, and they're an emergency right now?
That I don't know. I mean, it could well be that the COVID is more contagious than the common cold, or it could be that the Japanese culturally have, lost some of that historical common good sense, too much exposure to the outside world. Here in Hawaii, we have seen the benefits of masking for the flu season. There's this article in the paper this morning about how we had just one death from the flu this last season. Normally we have 100. That has been effective, and maybe we can use this experience to motivate more people to mask up during flu season if they think they have any symptoms. Maybe not, I don't know. We need to find a way to re-inculcate this common good idea. And it's in the traditional Hawaiian culture as well as in traditional Japanese culture. And it used to be in the United States culture. We used to, our Constitution says provide for the common good.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Well, I'd like to offer some other points of, what do you want to call it, complacency. Number one, let me throw a theory at you. So early on, March, April last year, our then president Trump was saying it's just a sniffle. It's just like the flu, common cold sort of thing. Don't worry about it. It'll go away. All this will pass and very soon. Okay, and that of course was not true, as nearly all of what he said was not true. But people who followed him, people his base, what have you, people who believed him and still do, they got the idea that it was like a common cold, that it was like a common flu, and that it really wasn't a serious disease. And although any sentient human being in the world today knows that's not true, I think a lot of people just held on to that and still feel that way, and that justifies their hesitancy about taking the vaccine. It justifies their hesitancy about wearing a mask. Do you agree with me that this is really a point that Trump invented and left with us as a special gift?
Trump, I think, certainly made the situation much, much worse, but he didn't invent it. I mean, before the COVID, we had people who were having measles parties because thought the measles was just not a serious childhood disease. You can have your kid get it, then they're safe. And it's like, no, measles can kill. Measles can lead to scarlet fever and weaken your heart, and that'll kill you. A whole bunch of side effects of measles. I've got ringing in my ears ever since I had a bout of measles when I was a kid in Libya, before the measles vaccine was common. So I'm Trump didn't invent vaccine hesitancy. He didn't invent this idea that there's certain diseases that we know are deadly but are mythologically not so serious. Like I say, measles is the #1 example. The flu too. If we could get rid of the flu, we would, because in Hawaii, flu normally kills 100 people a year. So even the influenza, you think, oh, it's not that serious because you're used to the risk of the flu. You're accustomed to having the risk of the flu. And so it's like driving. Driving is the most dangerous thing almost any of us do on a daily basis. And we don't think about the risks. So we act recklessly, drive faster than we should, come around corners too fast, and we see it in the carnage on our streets. We see like 30,000 people a year being killed in the United States. If it was a contagious disease, well, there is a contagious disease that killed 10 times that many people and more in the United States, and we're still complacent about that. But if it was Osama bin Laden or somebody like him killing 30,000 Americans a year, you'd see calls for our action and yelling to do something about it. People get accustomed to certain risks, and I'm afraid the COVID might become like that. Once enough people are vaccinated that you've got 30 or 40 cases a day instead of 300 or 400, people become blasé about that risk too.
And that's also part of the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah.
So, I don't care anymore. My chances are low, so I don't care. But let me go on to another phenomenon, and that is the politicization of these things. It's not just Trump; it's the whole Republican Party. It's the Trumpism, larger than his advice last year about, his medical advice he gave us. False medical advice. What about that? If I find that somebody is not wearing, this is actually before the Rochelle Walensky statement, somebody's not wearing a mask, somebody's hesitant about a vaccine, I would tend to conclude that person is a Republican and following the Republican mantra. And now I could be wrong a certain percentage of the time, but a lot of the time I'd be right. So how do you think that plays into this whole pandemic in this country, where you have a politicization of things, where people are making a political statement by refusing the reality?
Yeah, well, I agree that it's really a problem that it seems to be politicized, and you're right. If you see somebody who's anti-COVID vaccine, they're most likely a Republican. But we've seen vaccine hesitancy among Democrats too. Liberals were notorious for being against the measles vaccine. It's unfortunate, the magical thinking on both sides of both far ends of the political spectrum. There's magical thinking, on one side is, oh, I'm only going to take natural stuff, and I'm only going to do this organic stuff, and I'm going to rely on naturopathy.
Vitamin C.
Cure all my ills, right. Right. And the other side, it's like, oh, we're going to own the libs by not having vaccines. It's like, both sides are anti-science. And both extremes are anti-science, anti-evidence. And you've seen this with the vitamin supplement industry, the nutritional supplement industry. The political pressure caused Congress to remove essentially the FDA's authority to regulate supplements like a couple decades ago. And now we're seeing that people are taking all these supplements based on incorrect, scientifically invalid information, thinking that they're going to help them avoid cancer or avoid the COVID or whatever. And it's a waste of resources, and people are just making themselves even more susceptible to snake oil salesmen in the future.
Don't you think in this country we have a certain sort of base level of anti-science? I don't believe the science. And it goes back to thalidomide. It goes back to the various things that, where the scientific community happened to be wrong, and people use that as an excuse for rejecting science. And then there were campaigns by the tobacco industry. Don't believe the science, keep on smoking, and campaigns by the oil industry. Don't believe in climate change, keep on using oil. I mean, those things. Actually, I believe have undermined our respect for science. We're great science, but we don't listen.
We don't listen. Yeah, and thalidomide actually is an example where our FDA actually succeeded. Thalidomide was approved by the European regulators, but the US FDA said, no, we need to see more data. So they did not approve it in the United States. And it turned out, so thalidomide was a compound that had two forms that were mirror images of each other, a right-handed and a left-handed form. It turned out the right-handed form is a nice sleep aid that helps you, but the left-handed form causes birth defects if your pregnant woman happens to get it. And in the clinical trials, they used very careful manufacturing, this very precise thing, and got rid of all the left-handed chemical. There was no left-handed compound in the trials. The right-handed thalidomide was in the trials, and it was effective and safe. So they started prescribing it in Europe. But then in the mass production, this left-handed form creeped in and started causing birth defects, horrible birth defects in Europe, mostly. United States, very few. You had to go to Europe to get the drug. So that was a big success of the FDA, and we haven't learned the right lesson. I mean, that was a big success of the FDA, and maybe they've been overcautious on some drugs since, but you would think that we would have taken that as an example of how to do it right and slightly tweak the process instead of taking off all the controls, which seems to be what certain factions want to do, take off all the controls on diet supplements and nutrition. So with nutritional supplements right now, they can manufacture it and sell it until it's proven lethal. And then somebody will step in and stop it.
Well, that's dangerous. That's dangerous.
It's too damn late.
Inappropriate in the world of science. The other thing is that, Trump goes back, when was it, October or so, and he has Regeneron, okay? And he has the best that medical science can offer. I don't know if he took everything but Drano to help him, and arguably it helped him. I don't think we really got the full story on how sick he was.
We never will.
The message, yes, but the message to the public was, if you really attend to this and you have the money and the connections, you will be able to beat COVID. Look at me, just like I told you guys, it was just a sniffle, and I think that leads to a lot of complacency. I mean, and to some extent, it's true. If you went to Queen's Hospital right now today with a fresh case of COVID, they would have the best possible, medicines, therapeutics, the best possible treatments, tips and tricks, and best practices to save your life. And I think some people walk around thinking that, where it was more deadly, say in the spring of 2020, it is less deadly now because of advances within the treatment area. Am I right? A, is that true? And B, does that affect the way people think about it?
I don't know if it's affected the way people think, but it's true that we got better therapeutics now. And there's a push to develop even better therapeutics. So you are less likely to die now than you were a year ago of the COVID, just because they've learned a lot about how to treat it. That's true in Hawaii, true in most of the United States in the first world. I'm not sure it's true in India and Brazil and South Africa and some of the poorer countries in the world. Certainly not true in Peru, where they have the worst per capita case of COVID deaths in the world right now. And we need to develop these therapeutics, make them cost effective, as well as make cost effective vaccines and get them out there to the world, because someday there'll be a variant of the COVID that breeds in some place where it's rampant, like Brazil, that will escape control by our vaccines. I mean, right now it's hard to see how that will happen because of the shape of the spike protein that makes it effective and the shape of the molecules around the spike protein that help it penetrate the cell once the spike latches on. Those two components are very vulnerable and very hard to change in a big way without the virus changing itself in a way that might make it even less effective as a contagion. So we're lucky in that regard, but how long will we be lucky if we let this thing continue out of control in the world?
Well, I think it's a very important point that people have to understand. Right now, we have two significant variants. And, the word is, and I take the word here from Dr. Fauci, the oracle of all knowledge about COVID, that you get a pretty good result against the variant if you've taken the conventional, vaccine. And of course, they're coming up with, and they don't have it yet, but maybe this summer or in the fall, we'll have a booster shot, but B, a booster shot that deals more directly with the variant. And that's all good.
Right.
The problem is that, and this goes to the tragedy of the common, is that we have a world in which people are dying at extraordinary rates. And the virus is shedding all over the place. And when you have more virus shedding, you have the greater possibility of new variants.
Sure.
I mean, that's the way virus works. And we have two of them that are deadly, but apparently not that much great concern because of the efficacy of existing vaccines. However, there could be, just as you say, there could be another variant tomorrow. And the more we let it go globally, the more likely, I mean, you could probably make a chart about the probabilities here. The more we let it go globally, the greater the likelihood is we'll have more variants. And just one of those variants can be resistant to all vaccines and just do a scourge around the world, including the US, come right back to US. And so, what's the chances? What's the prospect of that?
Oh, I don't know what the numerical probability is, but I got to say that, if you have a billion people sick, you have a billion times the risk if you only have one sick. So, I mean, you have a huge risk that we're taking as a world society by the rich nations sort of hoarding resources for their own citizens and not getting it out there. Having said that, we have a problem in our own country getting people to take the vaccine. But if 70% of people were vaccinated and 70% of people in every other country were vaccinated, this contagion would just fizzle out and we wouldn't have to worry about the new variants. So, not being able to actually predict, where the mutations in the spike protein can go that will make them actually evade the vaccine and still be effective. That's hard. I'm not a biochemist.
So, but just raising the possibility. I mean, it's like in the pandemic of 1918, our troops went to Europe and they spread around. It was an American vaccine, rather an American virus. They took the virus to Europe, and in the war there in 1918, they spread it around. And I think there was also a variant involved. And the whole thing came back to the U.S. in a second wave of pandemic in the U.S.
And oddly, we called it the Spanish flu because the Spanish media was the only media allowed to report on it. In every country that was in the war, they had an information blackout. You couldn't say that the troops were getting sick because that was a military secret. So because Spain wasn't in the war, they could report on it. So it became known as the Spanish flu, even though it was really the American flu. So
that takes me to the last thing. This is, we have learned in COVID, in Trump, so much about the media, about how they can be distracted and confused and deceived and deceive themselves. It continues to happen. For example, this whole affair with looking into making an investigation of the quote origin end quote of the coronavirus and suggesting it might have been originated end quote from this Wuhan virology laboratory. I mean, to me, that is extraordinary in the sense that we know scientifically, Mike, that these viruses come from the wild and they come through vectors. They are not invented in laboratories. No laboratory in the universe can actually invent a virus. And so the notion, you can agree, disagree, I don't know, well, you have to tell me.
I'm not sure I disagree. I'm not sure I agree with that, just because I know that we're getting very, very good at modifying viruses. For example, the Russians have had a lot of work at weaponizing anthrax and making it more deadly, more contagious. Creating a new virus, you're right, that's very, very hard. I don't know if anybody's done it yet. I'm hesitant to say it's impossible because we're learning so much every day about sequencing DNA, and the CRISPR revolution has shown us how easy it is to grab snippets of DNA and combine them in new ways. So a brand new virus is hard, but a virus that shows up and then you can modify and work with, that's quite plausible. And so I think it's
sure. And you work with it for two reasons: one for good, one for bad.
Right.
So, and then you have to use logic and geopolitical, interests in order to determine what that laboratory might have been doing. But my theory would be that it came from the wild. Somebody died in the wild, just like this chicken flu this morning. That the government became aware of it and asked the Wuhan Virology Institute to look into it to see what could be done to stop any possible epidemic. That's what they were doing with it, and they blew it. They weren't careful enough. Somebody took it home, and before you know it, it was spreading around. But it was probably also coming from the original source, which was nearby Wuhan. So
some
anyway,
bat,
right through some vector or another, and that's the likely candidate. So, but I think the investigation is kind of politicized in the sense that it was politicized for Trump and it debunked, but then it apparently also exists within the current administration. That the word origin means that the laboratory was building this for some nefarious reason. I don't think they're ever going to find that.
Yeah, I think it's worth running it to earth and just settling it one way or the other, with the best possible scientific evidence.
Which
somebody will never.
Xi Jinping isn't going to allow any of that.
Well, we got to convince him it's in his self-interest to do that. And how we do that, I don't know.
Well, and today there was reported in all the media there's a chicken flu case in China. It was not in Wuhan. It was somewhere northeast of Shanghai. And what I find very interesting about that is that it's a major press release affair for the Chinese. They told the world about it. Okay, but if you look at the articles carefully, you find that they knew about this a month ago.
They haven't learned enough lesson from the COVID. They try to suppress it, try to not ruin their economy, and instead they ruined their economy worse for a while than ruined the world economy.
So one thing, and this is my closing area with you, one thing is that they were able to shut it down by doing draconian things to their people. There was no question about you had to wear a mask, and for that matter, you had to take the vaccine. And in a dictatorial, government, the government can do that, and maybe in these times that's more effective than having a lottery. And I'm wondering where we go from here. If this gets worse, we're going to have to think of ways to incentivize people on a more draconian basis, I'm afraid. If this gets worse, we're going to have to find a way to incentivize them so there's really no issue and none of this, I'm sorry, I'm hesitant. My coworker got sick and she lost a day's work and I don't want to lose a day's work. That sort of analysis. And the other thing I want to ask you here at the close related is that, what do we do here, Mike? What do we do? We're getting confusing signals, again, from the government about what to do. Do I wear a mask? Not wear it? Do I inside, outside? How critical is it? Do I take the vaccine? Should I have gatherings or not? I mean, I'm really tossed about that. A lot of people are. What do you think? What's the best advice?
Well, wear a mask when you're, in a place indoors with strangers. Good grief. Go to the store, wear a mask. Stores can require it. Like I say, the military commissary doesn't, but Safeway does, thank goodness. And every private business is entitled to have these masking requirements. And and you as in your own home, you can have this masking requirement. So when I have people over, they're all vaccinated. I'll go unmasked with a few friends on my deck outdoors. But in general, if you're with people you don't know the vaccine status, you should wear a mask, especially if you're indoors. Outdoors, the risk seems to be a lot lower outdoors. So that's my advice. If you're indoors with strangers, wear a mask. Protect yourself, protect your friends, protect the community.
And how about asking people?
Of course, you can ask them. You can always ask them. They don't have to tell you. but you can always ask them. And if they're
One,
uncomfortable, then you make your own decision about your level of comfort with them.
one thing we had a show with one local business roundtable kind of organization, and they said, you have to be careful if you are a business and you're worried about people who don't want to wear a mask and don't want to take the vaccine, because you may be treading on the EEOC, equal opportunity there.
No,
and we're not sure what the EEOC did. And I said, what? Are you kidding me? Then it appears a few days ago that the CDC, and maybe in order to make up for its gaffe over Rochelle Walensky's, statement a couple of weeks ago about, you don't have to wear a mask if you've been vaccinated. They said that if you're an employer, this is really a critical point. If you're an employer, you don't have to hire or keep an employee who doesn't take a vaccine. And I think that's really important, really important. What do you think?
No, they're absolutely within their right to say, get vaccinated, you're out of here, unless you have a good medical excuse. But then you have to document that. And they can't reveal your medical excuse. Your employer can't reveal your medical excuse. If you say you're allergic to vaccines, they can't reveal that. But they're absolutely within their right to require you to have a vaccine unless you have a valid medical reason why you can't be vaccinated. And there's no civil rights issue there at all. People, employers just need to, understand they're responsible to the community. If you're in a business that's heavily customer facing and your employees may be passing a deadly virus to people, you have a responsibility to tamp that down as much as possible. So maybe somebody can't be vaccinated. We don't put them up front at the counter facing the customers. You put them in a position where they don't have to face the customers. And if there's no such position, then maybe you just have to say, well, we have to let you go. They can't reveal maybe why they let them go, but most employment is at will in this country.
Yeah, more and more. Yeah, but one thing you could say is, look, tomorrow morning, I want you in here with a card, vaccine card. No card, then find a job that doesn't require a card.
Right.
Give them a last chance.
Yeah, that's within the employers, and even the state could do that. The state could say, well, if you want to come into a state facility like the Driver's License Bureau, you have to be vaccinated. The state could say that. They could require that. You show your vaccine card to come in and renew your license.
That's the way we do this, don't you think?
Yeah.
You start, picking off situations where people need to engage with private or public institutions, and you say you can't participate with that institution unless you have a proof of a vaccine. Right.
Or of a reason why you can't be vaccinated. That's you got to have that kind of an allowance. But so you can ask anybody if they've been vaccinated. Your employer can ask you if you've been vaccinated. There are constraints on whether they can reveal your vaccine status to third parties, but they can always ask about your own and make their decisions accordingly.
Yeah. Well, we're learning so much about medicine and of course about, as you said, about sociology. Thank you, Mike. Mike DeWeert, our chief scientist. Really enjoy these educational discussions with you.
Thank you. It was fun, Jay. Thank you.
Always. Aloha.
Okay.